In a dying village, where crops turn to dust and rivers run dry, one woman dares to cross the line no one else will. Adunni has a little time before the darkness swallows everything her people have ever known. Beneath the ancient Baobab tree, a secret has been sleeping for centuries, and something evil has woken up beside it. She will face whispers that break the mind, shadows that steal breath, and a spirit that has never lost. No elder. No weapon. No turning back. Only her courage stands between life and eternal ruin. Watch to the very end. This one will shake you. Adunni was already running when the first scream tore through the village. She had heard the sound before, the pitch of a woman who has seen her harvest fail for the third time in one season. It was Mama Folklore, old and bent at the waist, kneeling in the middle of her farm with both hands pressed into cracked, pale earth that should have been dark and wet with life. Around her, the cassava stalks had curled inward like fingers closing into a fist. The yam mounds had collapsed. The soil had turned the color of ash. Adunni stopped at the edge of the farm, chest heaving. She looked out across the land and felt something cold move through her despite the heat. 3 weeks ago, this field had been the richest in the village. Now it looked like something had reached underground and pulled out every drop of living moisture. The ancestors are angry, Mama Folklore whispered without looking up. They warned us. They warned us and we did not listen. Adunni said nothing. She turned and looked toward the center of the village, where the ancient baobab tree rose above every rooftop, enormous and gray, its branches spreading like the arms of something that had been standing long before any living person was born. The elders said the tree was sacred. They said the spirits of every ancestor who had ever lived and died in this village rested beneath its roots. They said a person who disturbed its peace at night would not live to see morning. Adunni had never been good at believing things simply because she was told to. She was 23 years old and had spent most of those years watching the village make decisions rooted in fear rather than understanding. She respected the elders. She loved her people. But she had also watched sensible, hard-working men and women abandon their farms, their children, their own thinking, the moment a tradition told them to look away. And now the drought had come, the river was half its usual size, the farms were dying, and Chief Elder Baba Afolabi had stood before the whole village that morning and declared that no one was to approach the baobab tree. The ancestors have sealed their blessing, he had said, his voice low and final. We must pray and wait. Adunni had sat in the crowd and watched the faces of her neighbors absorb this instruction like dry ground absorbing water. Grateful. Relieved. As if someone had removed the burden of thinking from their shoulders. And she had felt, quietly and without saying a word, that something about this moment was deeply wrong. She went home that evening and did not sleep. The drought had begun 4 weeks ago with no warning. One morning the sky was clear and the air was sharp with the smell of coming rain. By evening, the clouds had dissolved. They did not return. The river dropped by a quarter in 1 week. By the second week, 2 of the oldest wells in the village ran dry. By the third week, children were walking 4 times as far to fetch water, and the oldest farmers were shaking their heads with a specific kind of grief that comes not from surprise but from a slow terrible recognition. And every night since the drought began, Adunni had noticed something the elders had not mentioned. A glow. Faint and golden, rising from beneath the roots of the baobab tree after midnight. Not fireflies. Not torchlight from a night traveler. Something deeper and steadier, like an ember buried in the earth and fighting to stay alive. She had seen it 3 nights in a row from her window before she allowed herself to believe it was real. On the 4th night, she pulled on her wrapper, tied it firm, and walked toward the tree. The village was completely silent. The kind of silence that presses against the ears. Adunni moved through it with her head up, her jaw set, her hands steady at her sides. She was afraid, she would not pretend otherwise, but she had learned long ago that fear was not a reason to stop. Fear was information. It told you that something mattered. What you did with it was the choice that defined you. The baobab tree was larger up close than it appeared from a distance. The trunk was wider than for men standing arm to arm. The roots pushed up through the earth in thick, twisted ridges that spread outward like the base of something ancient trying to hold the ground down. The bark was pale and rough, carved in places with marks so old they had softened into the wood-like memories. Adunni crouched at the base and pressed her palm flat against the largest root. The ground pulsed. She felt it clearly, a slow, rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat, but sluggish and irregular, the way a heartbeat sounds when the body is exhausted. She pulled her hand back and stared. Then she looked for the glow. It was coming from a gap between two of the largest roots, a narrow split in the earth that had been almost entirely hidden by moss and packed soil. She scraped at the edges with her fingers, then with a stick, and within minutes she had uncovered the outline of a stone slab, flat and deliberate, unmistakably shaped by human hands. There were markings along its edge, symbols she did not recognize, but which had the quality of things that had been placed there with great intention. She dug around the edges until she found a groove deep enough to grip. Then she pulled. The slab lifted with less resistance than she expected, as if it had been waiting. Below it, stone steps descended into the earth. Adunni looked up at the village. Dark. Still. Sleeping. She looked back at the steps, at the warm golden light rising from somewhere below, and she climbed down. The chamber was not what she had imagined. She had expected a small hollow, a cave, something cramped and accidental. What she found instead was a room, wide and deliberate, with walls of smooth stone fitted together without mortar, the work of hands that understood building at a level the present village had long forgotten. The ceiling arched above her head. The floor was flat and clean as if swept recently. And at the center of the room, elevated on a low stone platform, was the relic. She had no other word for it. It was a stone the size of a man's head, shaped roughly like a heart, and it glowed with a deep amber light that pulsed in the same slow rhythm she had felt in the roots above. The glow had the quality of something alive, warm, deliberate, aware. But it was dim. Whatever light this stone had once been capable of producing, it was now producing a fraction of it, and that fraction was fading. Adunni walked toward it slowly. When she was close enough to see its surface clearly, she noticed the veins of light running through it were irregular, flickering, contracting. Like blood in a body losing pressure. She reached out but did not touch it. Instead she studied the platform, the walls, the symbols carved everywhere at eye level. They told a story she could not fully read but could partially understand. The stone had been placed here by the founding generation of the village, set into the earth as a source of fertility and life, connected to the water table, to the crops, to the breath of the land itself. It had been tended once. Long ago. Then she heard the whisper. It did not come from any direction. It came from inside the walls, from the floor, from the air, a low, layered sound that was almost language, almost a voice, almost a warning. It said things without words. It told her she did not belong here. It told her the darkness in this place was older than her village, older than the tree, older than any name she had ever been given. It told her that she was soft and small and breakable, and that if she stayed she would be broken. Then the light in the chamber dropped by half. Adunni spun around. In the far corner of the room, where the shadow was deepest, something had gathered itself. She could not describe it precisely because it had no fixed shape. It was darker than the darkness around it, a presence that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and it moved with the slow confidence of something that had never had a reason to hurry. Its edges shifted and breathed. Its presence pressed against her chest like hands pushing inward. This was the thing that had been feeding on the relic. She understood it in an instant, the way a person sometimes understands a truth without being able to explain how. The Shadow Dweller, for that was the only name her mind could produce for it, had been here long before the drought. It had been awakened by something, time perhaps, or the slow forgetting of the village, the years of no one coming to tend the relic, the centuries of sealed stone and silence. And now it was here, and it was patient, and it was winning. It moved toward her, and the temperature dropped. Adunni stepped backward until her back touched the wall, and she had nowhere left to go. The whispers intensified, flooding her with images, her mother's face, her own hands turning to dust, the village reduced to cracked empty ground, every person she had ever loved walking away from her into darkness. She felt her breath go shallow. She felt her legs lose their certainty. She felt, for the first time in her adult life, genuinely small. She closed her eyes. She made herself breathe. She thought about Mama Folklore on her knees in the dead soil. She thought about the children walking for times as far for water. She thought about the river running low and getting lower. She thought about every person in the village who was sleeping right now under the belief that someone else, an elder, an ancestor, a spirit, was going to solve this for them. She thought about how none of them knew she was here. She thought about how she had come anyway. She opened her eyes. "I am not leaving," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not shake the walls or summon light from the ceiling. It was simply clear and final and true. The shadow dweller paused. Then it surged. It came at her in a wave of cold and darkness that hit her body like a physical blow, driving her sideways, filling her lungs with something that was not air. She gagged. Her vision went dark at the edges. She stumbled forward, one knee hitting the stone floor hard, her hands reaching out to catch herself, and her right palm landed flat against the relic. The reaction was immediate. Heat flooded up her arm and into her chest. The amber light exploded outward in a pulse so strong it threw shadows backward across the walls. The shadow dweller recoiled, its shape disrupting at the edges, its whispers turning briefly into something that sounded almost like pain. Adunni gasped and felt her lungs clear. She understood. The relic did not need a ceremony. It did not need a ritual. It needed the thing that had brought her down these stairs in the first place, the specific and unreasonable willingness to face what frightened her rather than walk away from it. The stone responded to courage the way fire responds to breath. And she had been breathing courage into herself since she was old enough to understand that the world rewarded the people who moved toward difficulty rather than away from it. She wrapped both hands around the relic and held on. The shadow dweller attacked again and again. Cold. Fear. Darkness. Pain. Each wave more ferocious than the last. It used her love against her. She saw her people suffering, saw the village crumbling, saw herself failing, saw every version of defeat it could construct. It was sophisticated in the way that ancient things are sophisticated, because it had watched human fear for centuries, and it knew exactly where to press. But Adunni had grown up in a village that taught its people to look away, and she had spent 23 years practicing the opposite. She did not look away. She held the relic and she thought of everything worth fighting for, and she refused, in the most fundamental and complete way a person can refuse anything, to let go. The chamber began to shake. The light from the relic climbed in waves, amber becoming gold, gold becoming white, white becoming something that had no color because it was too complete to be described by color alone. It rose through the stone platform, through the roots above, through the earth, upward and outward in all directions. The shadow dweller made a sound that was not a voice but that expressed something final, the sound of something that has existed for a very long time meeting the one thing it cannot survive. Then it was gone. Not fled. Dissolved. Undone. The darkness it had gathered simply ceased to be. The chamber filled entirely with light, and the light was warm, and it pulsed with the steady confident rhythm of something healthy and whole and restored to its proper strength. Adunni sat on the chamber floor for a long time, with her hands in her lap. Above her, though she could not hear it yet, the sky was changing. She climbed the steps just before dawn and emerged from beneath the Baobab tree to find the air different. Heavier. Charged with something that moved across her skin like anticipation. She stood upright and looked at the sky, and the sky was dark with clouds, real clouds, thick and low, the kind that meant business, and even as she watched them, the first drops fell. Rain. Not the cautious, uncertain rain of a sky making promises it might not keep. Real rain, committed rain, the kind that soaks the earth in minutes and makes every dry and cracked thing exhale. Adunni stood in it and let it hit her face, and she laughed. Not the polite laugh she used with elders or the restrained laugh she used in groups, but the full unguarded laugh of someone who has survived something and is still standing. By morning the whole village was awake and outside. By the afternoon, 3 wells had filled themselves. By the evening, farmers were walking their land with their hands running over soil that was dark again, and soft, and alive with the smell of things preparing to grow. The question of how spread quickly through the village the way all important questions do, gathering urgency and detail as it moved from one mouth to the next. By nightfall, enough people had seen Adunni walking back from the direction of the tree in the early morning rain that the answer was no longer a mystery. The elders sent for her. She came and sat before them without apology. She told them everything: the glow, the stone entrance, the chamber, the relic, the shadow dweller, the fight. She told it plainly, without drama or embellishment, because the truth was dramatic enough on its own. The elders listened without interrupting. When she finished, Baba Afolabi was silent for a long time. Then he said, "We told you never to go there at night." "Yes," Adunni said. "You did." Another silence. "If you had listened," the old man said slowly, as if each word cost him something, "we would have lost everything." He looked at the other elders. Then he looked back at her. "The ancestors chose well when they put courage in you." There was a ceremony. There was always a ceremony in this village for things that mattered, and this mattered more than anything had mattered in living memory. They named her guardian of the Baobab Tree, which meant she was responsible for the relic, for the chamber, for the passage between what the living knew and what the ancestors had left behind. It was not a title given lightly. It was not a title that came with ease. Adunni accepted it the way she accepted all things, with both hands and full understanding of the weight. That night, after the celebration, after the food and the songs and the speeches, after the elders had gone home, and the children had been carried to bed, after the village had grown quiet again under a sky full of stars and still soft rain, Adunni walked back to the Baobab Tree alone. She pressed her hand against the bark the way she had pressed it against the root the night before. And the tree answered. Not with words. Not with voices or visions or the dramatic machinery of spirits. Simply with warmth. A deep, steady, living warmth that rose from the roots and traveled up through the bark and into her palm, and up her arm, and settled somewhere in her chest where fear usually lived. It felt like recognition. It felt like the earth itself saying, yes, you. It was always going to be you, She stood there for a long time. From the roots of the tree, the golden light rose softly into the dark, steady and calm, the same light that would rise every night from that day forward, visible from every house in the village, gentle enough to sleep under, strong enough to mean something. A signal. A promise. The quiet ongoing proof that beneath the oldest tree in the oldest part of the village, someone had faced the dark and refused to blink. Adunni looked out at the village. At the houses where her people slept. At the farms just beginning to remember how to be green. At the river which she could hear from here, full again and moving with purpose. She had not done it for glory. She had not done it for the title or the ceremony, or the gratitude of elders who had told her not to go. She had done it because a choice had presented itself, stand still or move forward, and she had made the same choice she always made. She turned back toward the tree. She put both hands flat against its bark and felt the pulse beneath, steady now and strong, the heartbeat of the land itself, alive and unafraid.